in what I hope will be a great series of webinars. The first webinar topic is surviving and thriving in a remote work environment. And whether this is something we've done for a long time or something that's been foisted upon us in the past couple of weeks with the horrible situation involving coronavirus, we're all thinking about how we can do it and hopefully do it better. So welcome to all of you. I believe we have about 160 people on the video conference today, and we should be broadcasting live on Facebook as well as through Zoom. So just a quick check if we're live on Facebook as well.
We are live.
So I am so grateful to have this team of power panelists with me today. I feel extremely fortunate that I'm able to invite the team that's sitting before you virtually. And I'll have each of them introduce themselves. But I wanted to say that we bring you a range of people with a breadth of remote work experience to help you learn how to do your job better and to think about remote work not just as a team player in your company or school. We know we have teachers or hospitals. We know we have healthcare providers, but also as a human being. We'll talk a little bit about that too. We welcome a number of members of WE, which is Women Empowered to Enhance Wellness. It's a group that was founded a little over a year ago. Many members have joined us to talk about remote work. And then we have a technology member. We have folks from some terrific companies, some who are experiencing a downturn due to coronavirus, some who are experiencing an upturn. And then I also invited our resident expert, Sasha Connor. When I first worked with Sasha, it was when we were teaching together at Lehigh University, and then as a client in innovation at Clorox. Sasha built a remote workforce in innovation at Clorox, and then became that company's resident expert, and recently has launched her own company, Virtual Work Insider, which it happens to be a very timely moment to do so. So she too will share lots of expertise with us. So I'll start by just saying I'm Lisa Kent of Illuminations. I'm thrilled to have you all with us and hoping that we can bring a little bit of the bright side to your day today. We know you have lots of other ways you could be spending your time, and we're happy you're here. And just looking at the panel, I'll ask Michelle to introduce herself first, tell us about her experience and specifically her remote work background.
Hi guys, I'm Michelle Mohammed. I am the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer for DSE Healthcare. And at one point in my career, I spent 9 years working remote as a marketing consultant. And just like many of you, I'm working remote now today with the current COVID environment. So I'm happy to share my experiences with you today.
Thank you. I should say that we already learned a very key tool on Zoom today that we could actually touch up our appearances to you, and it's under video and settings if you want to use that going forward. Janet, will you introduce yourself?
Absolutely, Lisa, thank you. So I'm Janet Carter-Smith. I am an SVP of Client Development for Kantar Consulting. And my experience working remote is about 15 plus years. I have probably spent more time in my career working remote than working in an office, but I have had to adjust between the two. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks. Let's go to a guy since we're not just about women. Tony, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure, Lisa, thanks for having me. Tony Krecka, I am the Director of E-commerce and Digital Activation at Johnson & Johnson, working in the e-commerce space, obviously. I have worked remotely, I'll say on a periodic basis for years, more from a standpoint of a day here, a day there. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been working remotely in a much more regular basis. So thanks again for having me.
Excellent. How about Wendy?
Lisa, thanks so much for having me. I am Wendy Van Beesen, and I am a part of the Illuminations team, but I am also a leadership and executive coach, and one of the areas that I specialize in is resilience, which clearly is needed right now.
Yeah.
I have worked remotely for the better part of a decade and have really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Wendy. Frances.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks. My name is Frances Coco. I am with Bayer, currently the sales strategy lead on our cough cold portfolio. So brands like Alka-Seltzer Plus, Coricidin, and Midol. Most of my work experience is in the office, but I did have a work from home role a few years ago, which required me to transition from what I was used to a new way of working, which has certainly prepared me for the jump into work from home that's taken place in the last few weeks. I am a member of the Next Gen Committee on WE. And while I don't have any kiddos at home, I do have plenty of other distractions, and I'm excited to share my experience so far and how I manage those with all of you.
Great. We have a range of people on the panel with young kids to older kids to no kids at home, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. John, how about you?
Hey everyone, I'm Jonathan Uresco, and I work for a software company called Jamf. For those that are not familiar with Jamf, we help organizations of all kinds, from small business to enterprise and from education to healthcare and government, manage and maintain their Apple devices. If you've worked or used an Apple device at work, there's a chance you may have seen one of our products on your device. And I have been practicing quarantine for about 4 years in various roles at my company and on various teams there. And my company is global, but I'm one of the few people on the East Coast, whereas most people are in the Midwest.
Excellent. Thank you. Chicago.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chicago Amendola. I'm with the Nature's Bounty Company as the brand director for the Metrics and Body Fortress brand. I'm relatively new to the remote working environment. The last 18 months, our team's been split between the New York and New Jersey office. So we've been working in 2 different locations remotely, but most recently, personally working from home in the last week and a half. So a lot of learning that I've been able to get done in the last few weeks.
Thank you. And I have Brielle, and you may have interacted with her managing the background of this Zoom conference. So we may speak to her during the conference call, but she's been a heavy hitter, really making sure that technology works for us. And that will be something we talk a little bit about too, making sure technology doesn't get in the way. And so now I'll go to Sasha.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sasha Connor, calling in from the suburbs of Philadelphia. I am the founder and lead consultant at Virtual Work Insider. So it's a consultancy that helps teams and organizations work across any distance, which is super relevant right now. And I was a virtual work pioneer for the Clorox company. So leading large distributed teams from my home office here in Philly for over 8 years, including being the first fully remote member of the leadership team that oversaw the $1 billion cleaning division for the company. So 2 things that are coming in really handy right now: remote work expertise and knowing how to clean and disinfect.
That's true. So as I said, we welcome all of you. We're going to kick off with a poll about who is working remotely right now. Some of you may not yet be doing it or not be being allowed to do it. But Brielle, if you could put up the poll for us, we'd like to know who's in the audience. Please answer. And submit your response. And Brielle, when we have a summary, and do we know how many people are on the call or how many people are answering?
Currently, we have 107 attendees, and we're also live on Facebook.
Okay.
I am getting some feedback that for some reason people are having an issue seeing the Facebook live video. However, I'm wondering if it will post after. So if you're in here, don't worry about it. I'm trying to fix the issue, but I think it may just post at a later time. But right now we have 117. Yeah, okay. 117 total people.
And maybe Kelsey, who's also in the background, can take a stab at Facebook Live, because we are supposed to be broadcasting live at the same time.
We are working it out. No worries.
All right, so what are our survey results?
Survey says 75% said yes, they are new to working remotely.
Okay, so somebody else is asking online, where should we look to see the poll? I don't know if she didn't get it. Tell me again the results.
So the 75% said that they are new to working remotely.
Okay. So that's our audience, people who have not done this often or learning how to do it. And that's exactly why we're offering this webinar, because at Illuminations, we've been doing it for 20 plus years. And all of the folks in the room with you today have been doing it for a long time too. So hopefully Aisha, who asked about the poll, saw the responses, but mostly we have new to remote work. So we're going to start with something that I asked the panelists to answer for me prior to this actual session, which is if you had to give guidance, one word of guidance, one line of guidance to folks who are starting out in the remote work world, what would you suggest? And then we're going to put up a couple of slides, which are our joint suggestions and mine to you. Can I maybe ask Janet, will you start us off with your guidance for people who are starting the remote workforce world?
Yes, thanks, Lisa. I think one of the biggest pieces for me is when you transition from working in an office to working remotely, you have to find something that gets you in the work mindset. And typically a routine that if you're going into an office, getting up, taking a shower, maybe eating breakfast, maybe working out, and then the commute gets you in a headspace to know that you're going to work. So in the absence of that, you have to find ways to do that working remote. And I think it really helps to kind of prepare you mentally for your day. And so for me, it's getting up and showering and putting on comfortable clothes and reading through the daily news, having a cup of coffee. And that's the way I get my day started. But I think whatever it is for you is really kind of, it's important to set that routine because we are, you know, in the same place. So separating it some way by getting yourself into that mindset is very helpful.
That's helpful. And we heard that from pretty much everybody on the panel. Carving out a routine, a time that you're going to work, whether that time is 9 to 5 or not, depends on where your team is and what your management can do and whether you're homeschooling children, frankly. But also carving out a space, even if you're in a 650 square foot apartment in Brooklyn, and I know we have some people on the conference call today who are, finding a space, which is your workspace. We also talk about establishing priorities and a to-do list for each day that you're going to be working, just like you would in the physical office. So I'm seeing something that says webinar is now streaming live on Facebook, but I saw that before and we heard the complaint that some people can't see it. So I'm hoping that those of you on Facebook are now seeing all of us and our panel, and we're talking about guidance for people who are new to remote work. I'm going to ask one more panelist if you want to jump in here, and then we'll put up our first slide. Anybody else want to take this one? John.
So the biggest thing when you're transitioning, in my opinion, would be your mental and physical health. When you go to an office, you have a different set of things that keep you mentally sane. At home, that all changes. So you kind of have to onboard yourself to a new environment, whether it's the physical desk, like Lisa mentioned, where you have a physical workspace, or if it's something dealing with distractions, where you have either like a curtain or something similar that makes you feel like you're at a different, or you're at a workplace, not at your kitchen table, at your breakfast bar, on your couch, on your bed. Those are all really comfortable, but going into the physical health aspect of things, on your couch repeated for a week is going to destroy your neck and back. So find a comfortable chair, but a ergonomic chair. Ergonomics don't just stop outside of the office. So try to take the time and like in a time where we're all panicking, take the time to slow down, figure out what you need, because your employer wants you to be healthy. If you're not healthy, you can't do the work. So take the time you need to figure out that healthy environment for yourself.
Thanks, John. Sasha, did you want to get in on this too?
Sure. I was going to add a little advice around, First, be patient with yourself because remote work is hard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've been trained through the media to think that remote work is easy and it's all about being in our PJs and watching TV and you know, being relaxed. And that's not it at all. So as a remote worker for almost a decade, it is a lot harder to do everything remotely. You have to be really deliberate and intentional. So really think about who are some experts, both internally and externally, that you can turn to. So obviously you're coming here today to learn, but also each company usually has a couple of people who are really good at remote work. They've been doing it for a while. Find those people, galvanize those people, and use those people to help lead and teach within your own organization.
That's a good point. One of the things that we've been recommending to our clients is to establish a core team of people who know how to do this. It's often people from the sales function who have been working remotely for a long period of time, or people who work at another office, a place that was acquired, the East Coast when you're a Midwest company, and ask them to get going on providing advice to people within the company. And they've learned the lessons the hard way. We all have. That's why we're here to share with you today. Brielle, can you put up, from one of our audience members, they said it's important to move. And we are going to talk about not just you as an employee or a worker, not just you as a manager, but you as a human being. That's very important there. It's harder now because you can't even go to a gym. So how do you get up and move, and how do you get your family up and moving if it's raining, right? So definitely an important point. Thank you. Brielle, will you put up our first slide? And by the way, I'm hoping that we're rolling on Facebook. I'm not seeing that message anymore. Kelsey, can you just double check that? Okay. So our first slide is tips for you as a remote worker or as an employee, how to behave. And as I said, this comes from folks on the panel. Can we put it up or no?
Sorry, guys, give me 1 second.
Okay. And while we're talking about that, there we go. Okay. We'll talk about technical issues. And one of our pieces of advice is second to last, learn and deploy technology. So don't just join a Zoom meeting for the first time at noon, if the meeting's at noon with your manager or with a collaborative team. Get on early and play around and try it and test your slides. And we're going to talk about a virtual whiteboard, which is a way to engage people and collaborate. Learn how to fool around with that and use it. And if you don't want all your wrinkles to show, learn how to manage the settings. We didn't put them up, but we all could have put up the Golden Gate Bridge or the mountains behind us if you want a background other than your surrounding. Especially if you're like my dog is right here, if your dog's getting in the way and you don't want to show that. Or if you're Jimmy Fallon, if you've been watching his shows and his daughters come sliding into frame probably every 5 minutes. So here are our pointers for you as a remote worker or employee. Start every day in your virtual office. We talked about this. Engage as if you are face to face. And by this we mean pretend that you're actually talking to that person. And when you can use video because you are actually talking to that person. And we don't mean it just in work, but also with family members. Engage with your parents this way. Teach them how to use Skype or WebEx or Zoom or FaceTime so you can physically check in on them. Over communicate. So we can't say enough about this, which makes sense because it's over communication. We need to make sure our expectations, our observations, our deliverables are very clear, and the way to do that is to over communicate. As a worker, check in often and make sure that what you're doing is what your manager wants you to be doing, and prioritize and align on priorities. And importantly, get feedback. Get feedback more often. I just saw a note from Catherine. I'll address that in a second. Get feedback more often than you might do it if you're waiting for a quarterly or an annual review. Get it every week because you may not know if your behaviors are working well or not. So Catherine Murphy, who's also on the Illuminations team, just sent me a note in chat and said, but be careful because we're all hogging up all the bandwidth with all this video chat. And if you don't need video for every meeting, maybe think about whether you need to do that. the last point here, we also talked about keep a to-do list and own it. So now we're going to go on to our next topic, and that topic is how do you manage and motivate people when you're a team leader, or even when you don't have power as a team leader? Second slide, to get your team engaged and have them be collaborative. Let's take this down and we'll hear from our panel. And I might ask Michelle, do you want to address this topic? How do you keep your team motivated? What do you do to engage them in a remote work situation?
Well, I think one of the ways, one of the things I think we have to remember is that in work, you also have, if you're in the office, you also have the water cooler, right? So you have time to get up and talk to people personally about things. But in remote, you don't have that opportunity. So you need to create that for yourselves. And, you know, some people use instant messaging apps within their companies to make sure there's a place where you can talk about, you know, other things like recipes or what you're doing to keep your kids from being bored. Just making sure that you're having some interactions outside of work so you don't go crazy with the isolation of all this remote work. So that's one thing, is keeping people engaged outside of just the work. But the other thing is just, I do say that I agree that you don't have to use video if it's clogging too much or if it's unnecessary, but you do need that human interaction. So some of your meetings should be video with your team just so you can, you know, connect with them and feel the same way you feel when you're in the office. The other thing I'd say is really just, you know, we're a small office, so we just make sure that we have everyone's phone number, so we have a group text going. You know, sometimes when you're on meetings with external folks and your team is on the same call, you guys need to have a way to talk to each other to make sure that you're aligned on what the team is communicating. So just some of those quick connection ways to make sure you're still feeling human even though you're outside of the office.
Excellent. Frances, you want to get in on this one?
Yeah, I'll share a couple things that some of my leaders are actually doing to help maintain the connection with their team members that I've really appreciated. So, and keep celebrating birthdays. So we have a morning birthday coffee virtual meeting scheduled actually for Friday morning for one of our team members. And we've also had a 4:30 p.m. wine happy hour for the team, and it was optional. So if someone in this time is having a flexible work schedule and they were homeschooling or couldn't make it, it wasn't mandatory, but it was a nice personal connection, something lighthearted to break up the day.
And I think the lighthearted piece is an important one. We weren't really sure. It's so hard to balance the seriousness of this health threat against the fact that we can't take everything too seriously. So making sure there's some lightheartedness in what we do. Most of us are in marketing and sales. And while that is a serious job, it's not necessarily life-saving or life-threatening like some of the other folks on the conference call are facing. So how do we make sure we keep perspective? That's important. I don't know about you guys, but I've been doing way more virtual happy hours than I ever did before. And of course, liquor stores are still open, and I hear delivering in some states too. So, Sasha, yes.
I love the conversation about how do we keep the culture continuing to grow and to stay intact as this happens, because we don't know how long this is going to last. So that's a key piece of importance here, especially with the creativity that I'm hearing some of the companies being able to do. And then I would also balance that with, as a leader, I think your primary responsibility right now is to set what those virtual leadership principles and communication norms are. That is the most important thing that you can do right now, is to slow down, step back, and really communicate with your organization about how you expect people to be working together. So what are your new ways of working, for example? Do you need to have stand-up meetings in order to get the communication across? What are your core meeting hours, for example? So right now we're all doing this crazy work-life integration that we've never had before. So how can we adjust the meeting hours to account for the fact that we have other things that we're trying to juggle at home? So for example, you could set a norm that all synchronous meetings need to happen between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. East Coast time. And that way, you know that that's when everybody's reachable, but then the work can get done in the cracks of the rest of the day. Because what we don't want to happen is every individual remote worker now trying to have to figure out all of those processes and ways of working on their own.
So that's a really important point for you as managers and leaders. And whether you think you are a leader, you definitely are a leader in this circumstance. Setting norms and clarifying. And if you're able to have the power to put them in place, great. And if not, recommend them and an approach. That's something that could be a whole separate webinar, and it's on our list of topics for the future. Can you put up slide 2, Brielle?
Yep.
And I think we touched on patience with yourself as an individual, but also patience as a leader. Setting these norms is not something that may come intuitively or naturally, so we need patience along the way. Some of these are the same as you as a worker. Over communicate. In this case, you're over communicating up and down and across. Provide feedback often. As managers, some of us are more comfortable giving feedback, and some of us are less comfortable. This is not the time to hide behind a performance review. This is a time to give quick, informal, productive, and pragmatic feedback to your teams. And empower people. Make sure when you delegate, you give them an agreed upon deliverable and you leave them alone to do it. We have even less time to stop by somebody's desk and get their point of view. So when you empower, mean it, and let people stretch into roles maybe that they haven't stretched into before. As a leader, ask everyone who needs help. Ask because they may not feel comfortable asking you, and then provide it. Wherever feasible, provide that help. Expect change. So Sasha talked about setting norms, but things are going to change. Certainly in this circumstance, things are going to change. So expect it, be prepared for it, and be as nimble as you can in adapting and helping make it comfortable for those on your team to adapt. And this last one is a little controversial. Some people think this is a leader's role. Some people think it isn't. Those of you who know me know I really do think this is a leader's role. It is incumbent upon you as a leader to be the cheerleader. That is particularly important in times of crisis and in difficult times, but it's important generally, even if the biggest problem is you have a huge deadline looming over your head, or a lot of work and not enough resources to get that done. That's always the case, whether we're working remotely or not. So take on the role of being a cheerleader, not a phony cheerleader, but somebody who has the backs of the people on your team, and let them know that. All right, let's let go of this slide. We're going to do 1 or 2 more questions. Believe it or not, folks, we're halfway through our webinar. It's already almost 12:30, and I do want to leave time for questions that you submitted in advance and questions folks might have for the panel live. But moving on to my questions, things that I wanted you guys to cover. How do you ensure that to the best possible, you are able to prevent, and we even discussed this word, distractions. How do you ensure that you're able to keep focused and not be distracted? And Chicago, do you want to start us off on that topic?
Sure. One of the words my old boss had said that really struck with me is rhythm. I think that like when you start working from home and when you don't have the day-to-day contact with your team or your coworkers, and you don't know what else is working, where they are and whatnot, I think it's really important to establish rhythm with your team and with your cross-functional. So what I do with my team is that every morning, we all have little kids. So we're all struggling to get, through the morning and feeding our kids and whatnot. So we message each other and say, hey, how's it going? How are you doing? We check in on each other and say, okay, is it a bad morning? Is it a good start to the day? Things like that, so that we kind of know where we all stand. And then we also have a really, kind of standardized weekly, cadence of communication and then how we set our priorities so that we all are working towards the same goal. That's
an excellent thought. And for Illuminations, our cadence has changed. So the office team, who is now scattered to the winds, has a daily Zoom call. And the consulting team, who only met once a month or once a quarter, we're now meeting weekly. And so again, over communicate, make sure you're in touch with people, give people a forum to talk. One of the things we're going to talk about is, should we do this webinar next time just so people can talk through things on their mind? That might be one of our topics. Wendy, I want to ask you to give your thoughts on preventing distractions. And Tony, then I'm going to come to you and ask you to talk about those observations we discussed in the prep call. Wendy.
Terrific. So I think one of the areas that we were even talking about yesterday is this really a distraction, or is this just out of the ordinary? And so I'm going to talk specifically about where we are today versus just working from home, because this is the area dealing in the COVID-19 environment where it's really challenged, because some of us are dealing with kids at home, others are dealing with elderly parents. We're concerned about what's happening in our immediate world versus what's happening in our towns. And so I think, which we've talked a little bit about, is to show empathy. Empathy for yourself, empathy for your coworkers, empathy for your employees. And so I think to understand that challenges are going to be happening. You could get a phone call. And so I think the best way to kind of deal with that is to say to people that you're communicating with, hey, I know we're going to have this hour. Does anyone have anything going on at hand, so that it's recognized? And so that gets into the over communication. And I think it's just about identifying what those distractions or issues are, acknowledging them, saying this is okay, and then empowering people to act as they need to during the day.
That's a good point. When we did our panel discussion only, we talked about, are they really distractions, or are we just, especially now, fully integrating life and work together? And if we are, then a kid or a dog or what your parent, my mom called me in the middle of our call, and my mom's 82. I wanted to take the call. That's not so much a distraction today as it is just an integration. At Illuminations, for many years, we've had a no apologies rule. That is, when we're on the phone with each other, you never get to apologize for noise in the background, whether that's a partner, whether that's a child, whether that's a pet, whether that's a fire engine if you're in New York City. We all know life goes on. And I feel like that no apologies rules for everyone now. And as a good manager and a good team member, you need to remind people that that's okay, especially now. One of our questions, I don't know if we'll get to it, was, is this remote work situation, what Sasha's calling rapid remote work, this urgent transition for the whole world, different from remote working in general? And I think there's a lot of precepts we can take from remote working in general that are helpful. And then there are going to be a couple of things that are just different. And one of them is life is going to happen more than it might happen otherwise. Wendy, I'll let you take that. I'm going to put up the third slide, and then I want to go to Tony.
Sure. And I think we talked about this before, and just as understanding where we are in resilience, I think what's different about this is the emotional toll and where we are. When we think about uncertainty, there's different levels of uncertainty. So like a level 1 uncertainty is the virus is abroad, it's not happening to us. The level 2 is it's here. And so in our brain, what happens from a neuroscience standpoint is that we become more alert, and then the alarm bells start ringing. And then level 3 is, wow, the virus is here, like in our neighborhoods. Alarm really goes off, like our amygdala is hijacked. And what that does is it decreases our mental functioning. So I think when we think about working remotely here, if we are working in a level 3 because a loved one is diagnosed or something is happening, you're not going to be able to do as much work unless you're able to reduce that. And that comes with intentionality. So my research suggests, and just in working, that this remote environment under COVID is different than a normal work environment when you're working remotely.
Thanks. And there again, patience, whether it's for a team member, an employee, a partner, in your house, out of your house, matters a lot. Can you put up the third slide, Brielle?
Yep.
So this third slide is just tips from us on thriving and seeing yourself as a human being. So when we say manage your workday, we mean it's easy to get sucked into the vortex of working all the time when you work remotely. Those of us who have done this for decades know it's hard to separate work and home life. And so you don't necessarily have to be on call all the time. We have so many great technology tools now, whether it's Slack or text or video, that we could be accessible. You don't have to be. Set that workday, and as Sasha said, set the norms with your teams. Stay healthy physically, mentally, and emotionally. Certainly physically is on everybody's mind today, but this is also a big emotional challenge for all of us. There's a lot of anxiety out there. How do we deal with the launch of a new product when we might, and this was a call I got yesterday, learned that someone close to us passed away. So how do you do that? Rotate the pain. This really comes from global remote workers. Don't ask just the folks in Asia Pacific or just the folks in Latin America. Can you put it back up, Brielle? I'm seeing it as not as a slide. To be the ones to get up in the middle of the night. If you're dealing with a global team, rotate that pain. Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's them. And if it's just people on the East Coast and West Coast, J&J, Neutrogena, and Aveeno working together, rotate the pain. Do it really early in the morning for them one time and late in the evening for you another time. Welcome those you love and don't apologize. I already talked about this, our no apologies rule. If somebody comes into frame and it's a loved one, turn around and give them a hug and don't worry about it. Be a constant learner. One of the bright spots of this situation for us is that we've all been able to identify classes we wanted to take online and absorb them, whether they're about technology, whether they're about marketing, whether they're about trends. And you're here today to learn. So absorb as much as you can, be a constant learner. Talked about keeping perspective. Remember to have that sense of humor. It's hard in tough times, but this is just work. And there are other things that are more important. And remember that. And finally, give yourself a break. This is about being patient with yourself. You're not going to get the office right. Maybe you're not going to get up and do your hair every morning. In fact, some of us, it will be a very long time before our hair looks good. But we now can use that filter that makes us look a little better online. Still encouraging you to get up and get dressed and put on your face for work. It will help you get into the frame of mind. But if you screw up, if you don't get it right, if you don't get enough done, it's going to happen. Give yourself a break. All right, that's it for our 3 slides. I want to go to Tony because in our prep, we talked about some observations of what are we seeing happening in the workplace today. And I think he very eloquently put it together.
Sure, thanks, Lisa. And then also want to thank Brielle for getting me back online here. So a real-time example of plan for technology challenges. I think what I've seen over the last week or so is that there's an impact to everybody. So I think that that's pretty obvious, but you need to keep in mind if you're feeling the need to ask for support in a certain way or to block your calendar in a particular way because your schedule has changed, you should feel very confident in doing that and as we've been talking about, over communicate it, right? From my perspective, I feel very fortunate, dealing with some significant change in work environment for sure. But my company has been very proactive in communicating new norms. And also, while I have got a house full at home, I've got older kids who are very self-sufficient and are coping with this very well. They understand why they need to do this, right? My wife works remotely and has for years, so she's sharing tips with me on do's and don'ts. So my transition, I feel, has been pretty seamless, and yet I know how disruptive it's felt. For me, the struggle is Monday was my day to go to the office and kickstart the week. And I've really struggled with not having that these past couple of weeks. The rest of the week gets a little bit easier. But what I've also seen from coworkers and business partners is there are real challenges when all of a sudden you're homeschooling. You know, I've got coworkers who are having to block time just to make sure that their kids have an hour to prep on their online learning. And I think that that's one that's been, you know, it's gotten a lot of play in a lot of different ways. We've talked about it pretty openly here. There have been great examples. I think one of the things that's gone viral has been Jimmy Fallon's daughter showing up for his at-home version. And I think that makes it very real for people. But there's a whole other aspect on my team of 8 people. Half of them have relocated temporarily. They're at the other end of the spectrum. They don't have young families at home, but they've gone back to their families because their environment, their apartment situation, or whatever that might be with roommates, et cetera, is challenging because maybe the roommate isn't in a work from home environment yet, right? Or maybe they don't have the space to be able to take those mental and physical breaks. So I think what the appreciation for me has been that everyone's impacted in a very different way. And I've seen great examples of friends and coworkers who have communicated very proactively in a very authentic fashion of how their lives have changed, and as a result, how their workday has to change. And I think that's good on a number of fronts, not only so you can adjust and know what to expect, but I think that universally everybody gets a sense for this isn't just something that's hitting me, and I may have unique needs, and I should be very comfortable outlining them because we're all kind of in the same boat right now. So that's been helpful perspective for me over the last couple of weeks.
And we think that that can change over time. And so if we come back together, we'll talk again about what we're seeing in the workplace. But one of the things that we hadn't thought about was, so we recognize people might have kids. We recognize people are struggling to care for aging parents. Didn't think about younger generation who might be, you know, with 3 roommates in a small apartment, all trying to find a way to carve out space to work, maybe on confidential things, which is another factor, which is non-disclosure that we could talk about in the future too. I had another question that I asked the team to address, and we're not going to get into the details of technology, but by now, a week or 2 in, we all have our favorites, and you probably already had your company approved and have used and ruled in and ruled out technologies in the past. Whether you're using Skype or whether you're using Zoom or whether you're using WebEx or Microsoft Teams, all of them have their pros and cons. One of our pieces of advice to you is learn the software. They all offer free tutorials, or you can sit with somebody virtually on your team and walk through the screens. Don't learn it while you go, learn it before you're using that software, and tell friends and colleagues what you like and why. There will be glitches, there always are. You saw it today if we weren't streaming live on Facebook. But try new things and then make sure you let people know. From an effective meeting engagement standpoint, we all like the whiteboard function. It's on all of those tools. And we, if we can put it up, we'll just share it with you. If you're not using whiteboard, think about using it. Think about using it to tell your story and asking other people to vote for you. Brel, just make a little smiley face or something there. And so typically you'd be able to, now you want to add a hair, you'd be able to collaborate and add the hair. You'd be able to vote. We did a really complex.
Sorry guys, I'm not great at my graphics over here.
But you get the idea. And this allows people to participate and shows that you're engaged and you're thinking with them. And if you don't love this tool, there are other tools like it. So when you find the software you love, learn those kind of collaboration tools. Before we go into our last few survey questions, anybody else want to contribute something? I see. Raise your hand if, yep, Sasha.
I just want to build on the leading effective remote meetings topic, because that's what we're all going to be doing all day long for the next however many weeks or months. And I have a plea. I have a plea for you all. If you're about to call a meeting, sit down and think out what your agenda is, what is your purpose, what is the outcome that you want of the meeting, and what is the least amount of people that you need to make that decision or move forward, or even do you need a meeting at all? And the reason I'm putting out that plea is because of everything we just talked about right now in terms of how we're being pulled at for time for work, time for home, time for caring for elderly parents or our children. And we get in the habit in the corporate world. I was in CPG for 14 years of calling meetings and getting in meetings and having hour-long meetings when 15 minutes could have worked. So this is the time.
Is, Sasha.
Oh, sorry, consumer packaged goods. So large consumer packaged goods companies. So this is the time for you really to think about how to have the most productive, shortest, efficient meeting and facilitate it really well.
That should have been in our slides too. We'll add that. Make sure we have an agenda and deliverables for any meeting, and only call a meeting if you have to. We'll go to John, then Francis, then Janet. Go ahead, John.
Just bouncing off of what Sasha just said about having the effective meetings, having them timely. The first couple of weeks, you're gonna struggle. You're going to see weird things happen. You're not going to be used to a software. So take the time. Everyone at your organization that was not working remotely is now working remotely. You're all in the same boat. So be patient with yourself. Know things will be quirky. Be patient with others as well. But planning ahead and being proactive, as Sasha mentioned, is going to eliminate all of those unknowns.
Thank you. Francis.
Yeah, actually, that's a perfect transition. One of the things I've been giving a lot of thought to is what can I do differently in how I work that'll help my colleagues who require an even more flexible schedule. And one of the first things that came to mind is really being more proactive when I need to work, when I need input or I need to collaborate with team members. We have a culture where we tend to work very fast, and it's not fair to expect someone to reply to an email that same day because you didn't plan your work accordingly. So I'm really trying to make a concerted effort and encouraging colleagues to plan a little bit further ahead, along with the prioritization of what's the critical work.
And that's a good point. Even if it's not remote work, let people know your expectation of turnaround and plan better so they're not backed into a corner. Janet.
Yes, I think kind of piggybacking on some of the great comments around planning your day and no apologies is also, it's okay to communicate what your best times are, and to plan your work according to when if a project requires a lot of collaboration or your best thinking. Just make sure, if you can, that it doesn't conflict with other things that are going on in your house during that time. And it's okay to communicate that to others. And it's also okay to ask others, when is your best time, in order to collaborate your best with your coworkers. So just one
That's
thing.
even better, asking them. That's a great point. Ask people what's their best time versus assuming. Maybe it is going to be that, asynchronous conversations happen later, but those meetings that have to happen with a bunch of people on the phone together, ask what times are good. By now we know, my high schooler, he was supposed to have online classes till 12:30. They actually only go to 10:30. So after, not that I get to help much, but when I do, after 10:30 is good. And if my Zumba teacher who's teaching online can only schedule for 6:30 at night, I don't want to miss that chance. So that's okay too, right?
Yep.
Just ask people what times work best for them. And we'll add that to the list too. Good point. Anybody else? Yes, Michelle.
So I just wanted to add that we should keep perspective in the sense that the fact that we're on this call talking about remote work means that we actually have work.
Yes.
And that there's a lot of people now that are being laid off in this environment. So making sure we're thinking about those people, checking in on them, you know, helping them out and having empathy as well. It's just something for us to be mindful of.
It is, and one of the topics we're going to ask you to vote on for the future is, would you like us to do a talk about optimizing your LinkedIn profile and how to use LinkedIn? We could all be those people without jobs in the future. If we are, we need to be prepared, and if we're not, we need to be helping. So either way, that might be something, and we shouldn't be ashamed of it, that we always want to have our profile stay up to date, even if we're not planning to go anywhere. So that'll be on the list of potential future topics. Empathy, definitely a theme for today. I'll close by telling you about something that I saw on a chalk sidewalk, written in chalk by some girls down the street. But before we do that, we have a couple survey questions. Yes.
Really quick before we go to the poll, there are some people who have asked questions. So if you want, I can read them and then have you guys answer them live.
No, I think what we're going to do in the interest of time, I'm seeing what's on the Zoom webinar chat. Are they beyond that?
There's a Q&A section. There are 2 questions in there. Actually, 3. And I saw you answered one.
Yep, we answered one. One is about educators and what advice can we give to school educators trying this for the first time, working with peers and students. So I think it's even harder to engage children who might have short attention spans and are used to the stimulation of school than it is maybe to engage coworkers, although sometimes they're snoozing while you're talking. I've had that experience. And, you know, so the challenge is real. And the one piece of advice that I would give is something that I learned from being taught how to teach online classes at Rutgers University. Bite-sized chunks. Don't take the presentation you're going to do in a 45-minute class and just put it online and expect them to listen. This goes for 4-year-olds up to 84-year-olds, but is really important with middle school and high school and college kids. You can't just repurpose what you're going to teach in class. Try to make 10-minute, no longer than 10-minute sound bites, mini presentations. Take a break. Incorporate an activity. Incorporate an interactive activity if you can. Use video. There is a video on any topic known to man on YouTube today. It is not hard to find it, so start to integrate that. And if it's not approved by the school, say, you know, I can't show you some things, but the school will have resources for you to access others. So I guess my number one piece of advice is, first of all, thank you for being an educator and undertaking this challenge. And second, really think about bite-sized chunks, no matter what age students you're dealing with. And don't expect to cover everything that you might have covered in a full 45-minute, 1 hour, or God forbid, I was teaching a 3-hour class. So, and have them interact with each other as much as possible. There are tools on Canvas or on any of the college or high school boards that allow them to interact with each other. And one of the things that I do is I have them responsible for responding to each other's work, and then I check that they actually talk to each other the way they would when they're not supposed to in your classroom. Anybody have any other advice for educators who are on the line? Tony.
No, the only thing I would add is that this is a great opportunity to share best practices, right? So there are other educators out there with great ideas, and also solicit the feedback from your students. It's going to be a different level of engagement. You're not in person, but you know, you get great ideas from everywhere, and in particular from your students. It'll just get them that more engaged.
Yeah, ask them to tell you what they want to see. They're not usually very shy about it. All right, last 3, speaking of interactive activities, polls, we're going to ask you. I'll close with a statement. And if I haven't said so enough, I feel very privileged to have this group of panelists with me today. I could talk to them for hours, but we are going to close on time, and I am very, very thankful to have your brains and your hearts and your voices today. So thank you for being here with me. Let's do the polls, Brielle. First poll is the one on what's worrying you. You can only pick one, and I know this is a hard choice, but if you can tell us what is most pressingly concerning to you now. We are going to send this out as we do our next webinar and maybe talk about those items that are on people's minds. So we have a great big audience here and we wanted to ask the question. Everybody take a moment to answer this question. Okay, and then we'll in our next webinar, we'll release the results. And if you have a question you want to ask about 200 people in our general area, let me know and we'll add that to the next webinar. Okay, next question, next survey. This one is going to be about, was this a good use of your time? You spent almost an hour with us. Are you glad you did? And then, if we're doing it again together, are some of these topics interesting? If yes, check them off. And if not, send me a note or send a note through Zoom telling us what you want us to talk about. We may use the same panelists. We may assemble a different crew. It may be some combination. But I'm so thankful for the fact that usually when I ask experts to join me in a panel, they say yes. So when I'm curious about something, I ask. And when you are, you should ask us too. So number one, based on your experience today, how interested are you in seeing future webinars from us? Please answer that. And then if you had to pick a topic, these are on our list today. And we might just do one that's a hangout, all Q&A. Please answer that and submit your responses. Okay. Everybody answer, Brielle?
We've got a few more trickling in.
Okay. Can you just give me the answer to question 1? Can you put that up? Hope it's good, but we'll see.
I don't know that I can put it up,
Just
but
tell us, very interested. Is it more than half?
yes, 76% of everybody said that they're very interested, and no one said that they were not interested. So this is
great.
good.
So we'll be back, and I'll look at the topics that you liked, and we'll welcome ideas for other topics. And just in closing, what I wanted to say is, I was getting ready to go out in my neighborhood, and as I mentioned, exercise is a challenge, so I had to go running, and for me, that's pretty darn slow. When I walked out of my door, there were 2 girls, probably 10 or 11 years old, writing in chalk on the driveway. And when I came back quite a while later, they had finished what they were writing on the driveway a couple houses down from me. And I know there's a movement out there to get people to put positive things in chalk as we're all walking around now. So you should do this, and you should do this with your kids. What they wrote is this: also highly contagious. And they actually spelled contagious correctly. They said also highly contagious, kindness, love, and gratitude. So with that, I leave you all letting you know I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for you being here with me, panelists, and for all of you attendees who listened in, and we'll be back to you soon. It's going to be recorded and available for those who couldn't attend if you want to share it. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Lisa.